All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at how a localized protest over in the UK completely morphed into this massive, intensely polarized online culture war. Today, we're digging into some really fascinating source material. It's a transcript from a very vocal online commentator who takes a single physical event and uses it to construct this sweeping, huge narrative about Western civilization, immigration, and the absolute state of modern political rhetoric. It's a wild ride, so let's get into it. So, how exactly did a single UK factory protest trigger a radicalized online culture war? Well, by impartially deconstructing this highly charged piece of commentary, we're going to examine the kind of severe rhetoric and totally contrasting viewpoints that literally dominate internet discourse today. Look, I gotta state this right up front. The language and the viewpoints in our source material, they're extreme. They are highly polarized. And our goal here isn't to agree or disagree with the host. We just want to map out exactly how this online ecosystem operates. Like, how does one single event get filtered through completely different ideological lenses? And how do these massive digital audiences react when they're fed these narratives? To figure that out, we've got a quick roadmap. First, we'll look at the UK factory raid catalyst. Second, how politicians and pundits reacted. Third, the Asmongold radicalization claim. And finally, we'll break down the host's broader thesis. Okay, part 1, the UK factory raid catalyst, the event that started it all. Right, so before the internet absolutely exploded over this, there was a real physical event on the ground in the UK that set the whole thing in motion. According to the source, here's what went down. Activists broke into a UK Air Force base. Once they were inside, they used crowbars and red paint to wreck military aircraft engines. But things escalated dramatically. A female police officer was actually struck with a sledgehammer, resulting in a shattered spine. Eventually, the 4 activists involved got a combined 22-year prison sentence. Now, the source heavily emphasizes these physical details. By really focusing on the violence, the sledgehammer, the severe injury to the officer, the speaker explicitly frames these activists not as protesters, but as domestic terrorists committing violent crimes on British soil. And the transcript specifically points out a number here, 66%. That is the chunk of their sentences these activists will actually spend inside a prison. The host completely celebrates this. He views it as this rare, tangible victory against what he considers domestic terrorism. To put it in perspective for the speaker at our source, this isn't just a standard legal outcome. It's a critical moment of accountability in a justice system that he portrays as being completely broken. Moving on to part 2, politicians and pundits react, a polarized response. Because the event itself, that was just the starting pistol. The real culture war kicks off with the reactions. And man, does this illustrate the massive ideological chasm we're dealing with today. On the left side, you've got progressive pundits framing the break-in as direct action to prevent genocide. They focus entirely on the fact that the factory supplies military equipment to Israel. But then, on the exact opposite side, you have the host of our source material, who firmly and repeatedly labels the activists as domestic Islamic terrorists. He's focusing 100% on the sledgehammer attack and the property destruction. Literally zero middle ground here. To really highlight this massive divide, the source pulls up a quote from Zach Polanski. He's the deputy leader of the UK Green Party. Polanski called it gut-wrenching to see 4 young people jailed for direct action against an arms supplier to Israel. Well, the host angrily critiques this. He uses it as glaring evidence of a massive double standard. He's fiercely questioning how a sledgehammer attack that paralyzes an officer could possibly be defended by an elected official as a valid, peaceful protest, just because of the underlying political cause. The transcript also zeroes in on Hassan Piker, the massive political streamer, reacting to the vandalism live on his broadcast. The host points to Piker's seemingly dismissive or even positive reaction to the aircraft being destroyed as definitive proof. Proof of what? That left-wing pundits openly support the destruction of British military property. The source uses this to argue that mainstream online commentators are literally sitting in the comfort of their streaming setups, actively cheering for the downfall of Western institutions. All right, part 3, the Asmongold radicalization claim, shifting online perspectives. This is where the mechanics of the internet get really fascinating. The host pivots away from mainstream politicians and looks at the direct influence this event had on massive gaming influencers. The speaker actually, proudly, takes partial credit for pushing the giant gaming streamer Asmongold toward a much more extreme vocal stance on these protests. The host literally says, "We successfully radicalized Asmongold, by the way. He wouldn't say this a year ago." I mean, that is a stunning admission of intent, right? It shows that for these online commentators, the goal isn't just to report the news. The goal is to shift the window of what's acceptable to say and actively recruit other massive influencers to their hardline worldview. And the source showcases this exact online collision to prove the point. You've got progressive commentator Mehdi Hassan calling Asmongold a freak on social media because Asmongold suggested the activists should be executed. But instead of backing down, Asmongold doubles down. He says, yes, that is exactly what I want, and I will vote for anyone who will do it. The source presents Asmongold's absolute refusal to apologize and his embrace of this super severe stance as a massive cultural victory over Mehdi Hassan's progressive outrage.
But here's an interesting twist. The host actually distances himself just a tiny bit from Asmongold's blanket call to execute all 4 of the activists. Instead, he argues a slightly different, though, let's be real, still extreme position. He says that while the specific sledgehammer attacker should face execution, the rest of the vandals, the ones who didn't physically attack the officer, should just be put on a flotilla and permanently deported to Gaza. The host actually frames this as a humanitarian compromise, which, honestly, just starkly highlights the intensely radical nature of this entire conversation.
Okay, finally, part 4, the host's broader thesis, worldview, and conclusions. Zooming out from the specific raid and all the influencer drama, the host strings together several really massive arguments to build his broader worldview. First, he claims Western institutions are experiencing Islamification. Second, he argues that open border policies are the direct, singular cause of domestic violence. Third, he says the general public is experiencing mass terrorism fatigue, meaning everyday people are just exhausted by the constant disruption and are finally waking up to the hypocrisy. And lastly, he claims pro-Palestine activists are actively ignoring actual violence committed by Hamas. So by weaving all these points together, the source builds this comprehensive narrative of a civilization that is literally under attack from within. And to prove how far up the institutional ladder this perceived problem goes, the host goes straight for the top and attacks the Vatican. The source quotes Pope Leo, who said, "Human dignity has no passport and does not lose its value in crossing a border." Well, the host mocks this fiercely. He argues the church is pushing for the mass importation of people while hypocritically hiding behind the massive literal walls of the Vatican. It just goes to show you that in this online culture war, absolutely no institution, not even the papacy, is immune to being framed as part of the problem. Wrapping up his fiery argument, the speaker asserts one final defining thesis, that these activists do not actually care about Palestinian lives at all. He argues that their absolute silence on Hamas's violence proves their real goal is just the destruction of Western civilization. He claims they're using the conflict in Gaza merely as a convenient political cudgel to attack the UK and America. It is a stark, absolute conclusion, and he leaves absolutely no room for debate or nuance. Ultimately, this explainer leaves us with a really critical question to ponder. As online rhetoric escalates to celebrate extreme viewpoints, how will the internet's radicalization of massive audiences reshape real-world political action? We've seen how a physical protest gets weaponized into this intense online battle. Pundits clash, influencers proudly claim to radicalize each other, and audiences of millions are fed these deeply polarized, combative narratives every single day. So what happens to our physical societies, our laws, and our real-world interactions when this level of extreme rhetoric is our daily internet diet? It's a fascinating and, definitely concerning dynamic. But understanding how these narratives are built, slide by slide, point by point, is the first crucial step in decoding the modern internet. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the narratives you see online.